What's up, guys? Andrew Erickson here from Pro Football Focus Fantasy Football Analyst. And today, I'm coming at you with my top 10 players and matchups to avoid for Week 14. Let's dive in. First off, quarterback position, Kirk Cousins for the Minnesota Vikings. So Thursday night can go a couple different ways for our guy, Captain Kirk. So we could see him dice up the Steelers' cover 3 defense as PFF's third highest rated passer against that particular coverage scheme this season. Or he could get overwhelmed by the Steelers' pass rush that is the second best defensive line matchup per PFF's O-line D-line matchup chart. So it could be a long day for Kirk Cousins running around, and what I think, they may lean more on Alexander Mattison in the ground attack, with the Pittsburgh Steelers allowing the most fantasy points to running backs over the last 4 weeks. So that's a logical course of action that the Vikings could take. Tackle Christian Darrisaw, Adam Thielen, wide receiver, are both questionable for the matchup on Thursday night. So Kirk Cousins, I think that he's outside the top 12 quarterbacks this week. So if you can get away from him, I would recommend to do so. Next up, Derek Carr from the Las Vegas Raiders. I know what you're thinking. You see the Kansas City Chiefs. Oh, baby, smash spot for Derek Carr. Not so fast. Not so fast. The issue is Derek Carr has been really inconsistent since the bye week. It's PFF's 28th rated quarterback, averaging just 15.7 fantasy points per game. Good for quarterback 23 over that time span. And this Chiefs defense is not the same Swiss cheese unit that it was to start the year. They actually have PFF's 4th highest ranking since week 7. They've allowed the 5th fewest fantasy points per game to quarterbacks in their last 4 weeks, making it not any type of smash spot for Mr. Derek Carr. So I'd be looking to take the under on Derek Carr's props across the board, 265.5 passing yards for Derek Carr. I'm going to take the under over that on prizepicks.com. Next up, Bills running backs all across the board. Devin Singletary, Zach Moss, Matt Breida, whoever they are. You just need to not play them this week. We can survive with a 2-headed backfield, but right now, the Buffalo Bills are making their case as the league's worst backfield, right there with the Houston Texans. So they're outside my top 36 running backs, and basically it's because when you have so many running backs involved, none of them can be used. Singletary looked like he was carving out a role in the passing game with Zach Moss inactive the last 2 weeks, but that changed when Moss was active against the Patriots, and they split routes run, and Moss actually saw all the targets with Singletary not seeing one target in that particular matchup. So in a game against the stout Buccaneers run defense that has allowed the fewest rushing yards to running backs this season, and the Bills ranked 24th in run rate anyway, we're going to see Josh Allen drop back to throw 40 or 50 times, and we're going to see the running backs hardly used whatsoever. So if you're holding on to Moss, Breida, Singletary, they're not going to help you in Week 14. Ezekiel Elliott, my number 4 guy here for running back position. Look, it's come to a point where Zeke Elliott is a touchdown-dependent running back that needs to get there either on a touchdown or just sheer volume. So the Dallas Cowboys' high-octane offense obviously allows him that. He runs a ton of routes and sees targets in the passing game, so if Dallas is ever in a negative game script, you have an out there with Ezekiel Elliott, but from a rushing efficiency standpoint, that is not happening in this matchup against the Washington football team. Very underrated. So they've actually allowed the same amount of rushing yards as the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, number 1 in the league. And the only thing that's different is they've actually done it on 26 fewer carries. So they've been better from an efficiency standpoint than the Buccaneers, and no running back they have faced this season has even surpassed 71 rushing yards. So if you find any Zeke unders, you want to take them on his rushing yards prop, because more Tony Pollard, Zeke's knees banged up, just not a good look for Ezekiel Elliott. He's got to find the end zone to deliver a worthwhile fantasy performance. Next up is James Conner for the Arizona Cardinals. James Conner has been a revelation this year. He's been leading the league in touchdowns. He's a machine. So this is not a call to, you got to bench James Conner. No. It's just a matter of, hey, we need to kind of keep things in perspective with him. So if he doesn't score a touchdown, kind of like Zeke, we're going to see him split snaps more with Chase Edmonds. We're not going to see the pass game usage as much with James Conner. it's a really tough matchup as well against the Los Angeles Rams. It's the worst matchup for PFF's strength of schedule tool because, again, another very big disadvantage in the trenches from the O-line, defensive line matchup chart. Aaron Donald is going to cause a lot of issues for his Arizona Cardinals offensive line. So I don't like the spot here for James Conner. He's got to find the end zone, or else he may be leaving you wanting more on Monday night. There may not be a Monday night miracle for your fantasy team if you're relying on James Conner to get you into the fantasy football playoffs. Halfway there, we're going to move to wide receivers. Brandon Cooks is my next guy here, and I get you having a smash spot against the Seattle Seahawks, or is it a smash spot? Now, I think it's important to recognize that Cooks has just really fallen off significantly in terms of his target share. Over the last 4 weeks, it's down to 18% from the 24% that it was out the 4 weeks prior to that. And it has to do with the declining target rate per route run. So it's not that he's like playing less. He's on the field the same amount. He's just not getting targeted nearly as heavily as he was during the beginning of the season. You're seeing the Texans get out some of their younger players, getting them reps, because that's what they're doing at this point. They're trying to see what they have on their roster and not necessarily feed their veteran wide receiver so that he can get fantasy points. Unfortunately, the Houston Texans, I wish they did. They don't play as much fantasy as we do, and they would know that we just need one running back, but I digress. Again, the Texans' number one wide receiver needs volume to get there. Davis Mills is going to be under center for the Houston Texans. Not a great look. So if he's not getting 10 targets, then I really find it hard for him to get there, even against the Seahawks. And the thing about the Seahawks is they have been not the best defense this year, but they've been efficient. They're actually tied for second in the league in fewest receiving touchdowns allowed to wide receivers. So with no touchdowns in Brandon Cooks' future, I think there are better upside plays that you can play this week than Brandon Cooks. DeAndre Hopkins, another tough matchup for him. Now, he got there last week, barely, because he scored a touchdown in a very rainy, weird game where Kyler Murray only attempted 15 passes. So it was good to just see him come out of that game unscathed, no injuries, so it was good to see. But what I will say about DeAndre Hopkins is, and even in a projected shootout against the Los Angeles Rams, like he has never had really these massive games against the LA Rams. In his last 3 games, he has averaged 5 receptions for 55 yards with 1 touchdown. So it's been very lukewarm performances for him. And now it's because, or it's not always because Jalen Ramsey's like locking him up. No, Ramsey moves around so much, but Ramsey gets to match up with DeAndre Hopkins. And this Rams defense as a whole is just a very strong unit against wide receivers. So I don't think that it's just a really good spot for Hopkins, not a ceiling spot. Like Hopkins has not really been a top 5 wide receiver really at all this year. So I'm really viewing him more as a wide receiver 2 this week. I know he's playing on Monday night. You're going to probably start him in most lineups, but just be wary that he may not have a massive blow-up game. So if you're facing him and your opponent has him, maybe you'll survive. You're not going to necessarily get nuked by our guy, Nuke Hopkins. Rashod Bateman for the Baltimore Ravens. Say it ain't so, Shoddy B. Ravens wide receivers routes plummeted behind Sammy Watkins and Devin Duvernay in Week 13, making it impossible to trust him for Week 14. The declining routes in back-to-back weeks is a telltale sign to stay away. And the matchup is terrible against Cleveland Browns. Leaves no margin for error. Like, he has to be super efficient on a super low route run participation route. And it's just not necessarily in the cards what you want to bet on with a Rashod Bateman. I'd honestly rather start Jonathan Peoples-Jones against that banged-up Baltimore Ravens secondary. That's what I'd rather start of a fringy wide receiver play. But the Browns defense has allowed the 6th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers over the last 4 weeks. So I would be wary of starting any of these fringier guys like a Rashod Bateman, Sammy Watkins, Devin Duvernay. Even in deeper formats, I think you can get away from these Ravens wide receivers not named Marquise Brown. Last but not least, wide receiver Cole Beasley. A big game for the Atlanta Falcons slot wide receiver Russell Gage may have you convinced, oh baby, this is a spot for the Beasles to go off. Not so fast. Tampa Bay Buccaneers have been one of the best defenses this season against slot receivers, allowing the 3rd lowest passer rating, 67.1 on targets to receivers aligned up in the slot. Beasley's dwindling 11% target share and 65% route participation over the last 4 weeks want me to look elsewhere for my wide receiver 3/flex play in Week 14. No for me on Cole Beasley. Again, it's the Stephon Diggs show, maybe Emmanuel Sanders, but I think it's going to be a lot of Diggs and Dawson Knox for the Buffalo Bills passing attack against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense. And lastly, we're going to finish with tight end Tyler Higbee. someone that I have been talking a lot about this season. I've written a lot about him, rushed about how often he's running routes in the Rams offense, and it's great. But at the same time, he's just not been consistent getting targets in the Rams offense. And the Arizona Cardinals are a formidable unit against tight ends. They've been one of the league's best at defending the position. They're ranked 4th in fewest fantasy points per game allowed to tight ends, creating a lot of doubt that Higbee's going to be able to be a serviceable fantasy option. I think that last week he saw 6 targets. He was okay. He had 5 receptions, but Odell Beckham was also playing less than 60% of the snaps. Like, Odell Beckham wasn't playing a full-time role in that game. So if OBJ's routes get back up, you have Van Jefferson, you have Cooper Kupp. It was hard enough for Higbee to command targets in this offense. Now you throw into the mix a terrible matchup against the Arizona Cardinals. You know, when he last played them, he had 4 catches for 36 yards on 6 targets. I think that's what you're looking at. Like, he's got to find the end zone, and the Cardinals have not given up barely any touchdowns to tight ends this season. So it's really looking like a floor play. I would be looking elsewhere than Tyler Higbee in week 14. So again, thank you all for tuning in to my top 10 players and matchups to avoid for week 14. Once again, I'm Andrew Erickson. You can find all my work over at Pro Football Focus. And of course, I'm on Twitter at Andrew Erickson _. Same thing on TikTok. So I'll see you guys next week.